Squirrels! So hello, and welcome to another Legends of Runeterra video. My name is Chris, and today we are on day 2 of why these champions suck and how to fix them. Now, as I've just mentioned, we're on day 2, so go back to day 1 if you haven't seen it already. There will be a link in the description, but basically the idea and premise of this whole exercise is that Riot gave us obviously the list of champions with lower win rates, and so we're going through literally all of them and seeing, what went wrong, how can we potentially improve these champions to get them to a win rate of potentially 50% or higher. That's kind of the whole idea, and so today we are tackling 3 champions that, according to Riot, have a 49% win rate within at least one deck. So let's dive in straight away and see what we can do. So the first champion we are going to tackle today is Heimerdinger himself, and follows a similar theme, I think, with the 3 champions we've got today, that all people probably would say that these 3 champions probably could use with a buff in some way or another, and so we will start with Heimerdinger himself. Heimerdinger has been, good in the past, certainly was, but, has sort of found himself outclassed as cards, kind of slowly power crept the game, something like Heimerdinger stayed a bit too static perhaps, and other things came in and replaced him. Now, it's not a shock to me that, there exists a Heimerdinger deck with a 49% win rate. I don't think Heimer is, one of the worst champions in the game. It just always feels like there's slightly, better things to do with sort of a spell archetype than to go for Heimerdinger himself. So let's talk about how we can fix Heimerdinger and, what we can expect perhaps if there does become a buff to Heimerdinger, which I think there might be, because Heimer, I think, is quite a popular character that the devs seem to, focus on quite a bit. So first things first, you've got Heimerdinger, some of Heimerdinger's support cards here. We've of course seen Adaptatron and Production Surge, both have come out more recently, which again I think showed you that they do want Heimerdinger to be good. They are giving him extra tools to try and help him be good, if you can say that. And there are other tools like Flash of Brilliance is obviously a Heimerdinger meant card, and there are some others. I mean, Hextech Transmogulator here. I'm pretty sure this is meant to be a Heimerdinger card. It feels very sort of Heimerdinger-ish in terms of the whole experiment and transforming things. So his support cards, I would say they aren't amazing. Flash of Brilliance, works pretty well with Heimerdinger, but maybe it's not essential as it used to be. Production Surge I actually quite like as a card for Heimerdinger. I think this is a nice little innovation. Adaptatron I haven't tried out too much myself, so I can't really comment too much. It seems like it would be okay. It seems like a nice engine perhaps. I think I would prefer if this, had a bit more of survivability. Maybe it was a 2-mana card instead of a 1-mana card and had something like 4 or 5 health. Probably 4 if it was a 2-mana card. But, because Heimerdinger, of course, you're not playing till turn 5 anyway, I would have liked to see this, be higher cost with more survivability. But it could be fine, right? But I think the main focus we need to have here is on Heimerdinger himself, because I think that's where really the problems lie with Heimerdinger, because he is a very flexible champion, because essentially you can play him in any deck that casts spells, and PNZ has a lot of spells already, so he is very flexible in where you can play him. So I think any problems that Heimerdinger has mostly come from himself and his own design. So what are the problems with Heimerdinger himself? Well, there's a few. First of all, as we've seen, and I think as others have pointed out, there has become perhaps, some champions with just better stat lines. You think of Zillion, that is a 2-mana 1/4, and you think of Azir, which is a 3-mana 1/5, and then you look at Heimerdinger, and he's a 5-mana 1/3. And I don't think that, that should mean that Heimerdinger becomes like a 1/7 if you follow the pattern, because that would be ridiculous. But I think most of us probably could agree that if Heimerdinger had 4 health rather than 3, that probably would be a fair change, and that wouldn't shock me if that is the change that they went for Heimerdinger. It really wouldn't shock me at all, because Heimerdinger received nerfs in the past, if you don't know. Basically, the 3-mana turret used to be the elusive turret, and that caused sort of big problems, because with Flash of Brilliance and other 3-mana spells, this actually happened to me once, I'm pretty sure, in a game, where someone played Heimerdinger and then played 3 Flashes of Brilliance and a Get Excited on the same turn and hit me for 18 and lethal in one turn. They played what would it be, 5 elusive turrets, I think, Was it 5 or 4? Oh, maybe they hit me for 15. Either way, you know, that was obviously ridiculous and there was nothing I could do about it and it felt really bad to lose. So I was pretty happy with this change and I think most people were. And so I don't think I would expect them to necessarily revert that without some sort of major redesign. The most common thing I think they would do is just give Heimerdinger 4 health, which probably would see him become decent again, if we're being honest. But I think Heimerdinger, in all honesty, has bigger problems. And I think what would happen is if they buffed Heimerdinger's health, is he would be good again for a little bit, and then eventually things would power creep him again to the point where he wasn't good again, because of just the way he is designed. Because in a similar way to Vi, that we saw and dealt with yesterday, the difference between Heimerdinger's level 1 and 2 is perhaps even more minimal. It is almost non-existent. You give your, extra turrets an extra 1/1, which is essentially, unless, in very specific scenarios where your opponent has, like, Withering Wail or whatever, literally useless. And so, if I was, reworking Heimerdinger and retooling him completely, I think we need to do what we did yesterday to Vi, bring the level 1 down and bring the level 2 up so that there is sort of a need to level up Heimerdinger so that then he can win you the game. I think that that is what is important. And so how do we do that? How do we create that? And I think I've had a little think about this, and I think the best way of doing that is actually to remove the keywords from the level 1 Heimerdinger. That's what I'd do. I'd remove all of these from having keywords. So, you essentially just get a 4/1, a 5/1, a 6/1 on his level 1 form, but then in his level 2 form, you get the keywords back, and potentially you can give them 1/1 as well, because that creates that difference. Now, you might think, well, that's just a big nerf to Heimerdinger. And so, yeah, and that is true, by the way. So, what I also think you could do is, if that was the case, you could make Heimerdinger 4 mana. And that is a big deal, especially for a card like Heimerdinger, this value engine. The quicker you can get something like a value engine online and working for you, the stronger it is. And a 1 mana decrease on Heimerdinger would be a big, big buff, even if these bots could not get their keywords straight away. And that is because giving you that body, Heimerdinger, is kind of the card that the longer the game goes on, the better chance you've got of winning because you've got Heimerdinger on the board, right? That's kind of the whole point of Heimerdinger. But if you can get him down earlier, it doesn't necessarily matter that these turrets don't have the keywords at first, because they'll help you survive, no matter what mana cost they are, they will help you survive. But then, once you've actually leveled up Heimerdinger, which will take a few turns perhaps, then that's when you start getting the big keywords, and then that is when you start, really seeing some payoff. And potentially what could even happen is that, you could, have some choice of keywords for them as well. You could change the way that the keywords work so that, when you play a turret, for instance, it has the, a chance of getting any of the keywords, you get to pick of 2 or something like that. That's something else that you could do, which really would make Heimerdinger leveling up a big deal. And that is what I think we need to do. We need to get away from, essentially them being the same thing, and allow Heimerdinger's level up to be a very big deal, and that would certainly do it, in my opinion, and that would make Heimerdinger, strong, and in the right deck, I'm sure very strong. But you'd also need to level him up, which I think is a fair sort of balance point of where Heimerdinger should be, and then you could always look at, is that level up too easy or too low for how much, benefit you get once you do level up Heimer. And that is what I would do, and I think it would make a big change to Heimerdinger and the way he plays and how much fun he is. I think Heimer would be a really fun champion if that was the case. Moving on to our next champion is another one that I think most people would agree probably does need a buff of some sort, and that is Katarina. Poor Katarina has never, ever seen really competitive top-tier play. I think she is underrated in a way, in a sense that if you put her as a one-off in certain decks, it actually can be very effective in certain meta games as well. This current one is probably far too fast for something like Katarina, but I don't think she's completely useless as others would have you believe, but she definitely does need some kind of buff, and Katarina follows a similar pattern to Heimerdinger, I think, where her synergy cards, she's kind of a standalone card again, where you don't necessarily, need that much from her, like, supposed followers. I think her supposed followers are meant to be stuff like Legion Marauder and Battering Ram, things that attack and gain something. I'm pretty sure that that's where they wanted us to go with it, but I can't be 100% sure about that, but I'm fairly certain, because that would make sense, of course. So with that in mind, we have Katarina, and so we probably need to solely look at Katarina and what are her problems and how do we address them. So the first thing to note about Katarina, and something that people have suggested in the past, but I'm going to just explain why it's a bad idea, is of course Katarina is the only champion that changes mana cost from her level 1 to her level 2 form. And, you know, you might think, oh, why is that? Well, of course, that's for a reason. A very good reason. And I think people have, you know, maybe perhaps figured out what that reason is now in this current metagame, as attacking 3 or 4 times in a turn is pretty strong, it turns out. Who knew that that would be, like, really strong, even when it's just a bunch of 1/1s? It turns out that that is, like, a really big issue for a lot of decks that don't, you know, necessarily have the tools to deal with that. Yeah, we've seen that, of course, with the Zero Aurelia in this metagame, and that's why Katarina's 4 mana, and that's probably why she needs to stay 4 mana in her leveled up form, because attacking 3 or 4 times in a turn, you know, if you think she costs 3 mana, then of course on turn 9 and 10, if you have the attack token, you can attack 4 times in one turn, which would be excessive. I'm sure most of you could agree, and a lot of decks would struggle with that. So with that in mind, so we can't really change Katarina's 4 mana cost here. How else could we change Katarina? Now, one thing a lot of people have complained about is Katarina's champion spell here, Katarina's Death Lotus, really doesn't help Katarina that much. You know, she doesn't really benefit from losing her health. In fact, that's pretty bad for Katarina as a whole. And she actually doesn't want to kill the unit that she's hitting because she wants to strike it. You know, you don't want to kill the unit that it's hitting. So this is a very odd spell in general, I guess you could say, and other people, you know, and many people have said this needs to be changed. Now, one spell that they have pointed out that it should be changed to is Shunpo, which obviously is, you know, a Katarina type spell. Deal 2 to an enemy, then rally. I'm not sure that this is really what Katarina needs either, of course, because to play Katarina Shunpo, if this was her champion spell, you'd have to have Katarina on board, and so you'd have to, like, it would be odd. You'd have to have her on board, but not have the attack token, so you use it, but then, like, it would have meant that you have not struck with Katarina when you played her the time before, if you can understand what I mean, because otherwise she'd be back in your hand. You need to have rallied, attacked, but not with Katarina for this to make any sense. So I don't think that Shunpo should be her spell, because I don't think that that would make any sense either. What Katarina really needs is some kind of, like, really the answer would be something like Bone Skewer, or any sort of spell like that, if I can find it. I've even got it. I don't have the card, apparently. This card that came out for Bilgewater, you know, an ally strikes an enemy. I mean, then the moves to the top of your deck, that's probably not needed necessarily, but a concerted strike, something like that, that should be something like Katarina's spell, if you could make it, something that allows her to strike. You know, Whirling Death is obviously like a Draven, you know, kind of thing. You know, it's very obviously Draven. But something like that would be better for Katarina. Now, so that means probably redesigning a spell in some case. Which would help Katarina, I think, greatly. If there was some spell that she could have that was like a fast speed strike that was her spell, it would make so much more sense and allow her to, you know, level up reliably, and it would be great for Katarina, as you could then probably play 3 Katarinas in a deck. But unfortunately, at the moment, that seems somewhat impossible. So that would be one thing, of course, but that would need a redesign of a card or a new card to come out and then to change the spell. Which maybe will happen in the future, but who knows? So how else can we change Katarina if we can't, you know, just redesign random spells in the game, which do still have a, you know, Death Lotus still has a purpose in other decks, just not necessarily for Katarina. So it needs to stay in the game, but, you know, just not for Katarina. So how else do we change Katarina? And I've said this before, and I'll say it again, because I do think that this is the solution. And it's not got to do with Katarina's stats necessarily, although this is something you could do. You know, you could make Katarina 3/3, give her more survivability. Again, that's something that they could look at. We'll see. But personally, I would change this number here to 2. I would keep this at 4, as I've said before, but I would change this to 2. Now, a 2 mana 3/2 with quick attack is nothing new. You know, Lucian is that exact stat line, and, you know, I don't think most people think that Lucian is overpowered or oppressive in any sort of way. So a 2 mana 3/2 with quick attack isn't changing the game at all. You might want to take away the Blade's Edge if you do decrease the mana cost of this first form, because, you know, having a 2-mana card that can potentially kill your 1-drop and, you know, becomes a leveled up champion, that could be quite scary, and I agree that that probably shouldn't be the case. But if you make Katarina 2-mana, it solves so many other issues, and her biggest issue has always been that she is so slow in tempo that it is tough to find the right deck to make it work for Katarina. I've often said anytime I play Katarina that you really need to view this card as a 7-mana card, but that's basically because she's way too slow to play on turn 3 to make it worth it. And so that's why I think you really need to change this mana cost to 2 mana, because on turn 2, it's okay. You know, it's okay to play something that recalls itself. 2 mana isn't the biggest loss in the world. You know, it often happens. You'll Mystic Shot something and they'll Glimpse Beyond. Essentially, you've lost 2 mana there as well. And it happens all the time in the game, but it doesn't feel like you've just lost the game on the spot. But often when you lose your turn 3 play and can't really play that on turn 4, your opponent can start to snowball you pretty quick. You know, you could think of something like Avaros and Trapper that draws the Yeti. If they play the Yeti and another 3-drop on the same turn next turn, and you've only got a Katarina in your hand that you've recalled from the last turn, you're in a lot of trouble. And that's the problem with Katarina at the moment. But under this new system, what you would have is a 2-mana card that you could play. You can level up straight away, and then you can hopefully play a 3-drop as well that, you know, can solidify the board for you and start building that board back up, so that then you can make the use of Katarina's leveled up form and get those strikes in. So that is what I would change to Katarina. I would probably get rid of the Fleeting Blade's Edge, make Katarina a 2-mana card in her first form, keep it at 4 mana for her second form, and I think you would be on to a winner and something that would be really fun to play. And if you can find a way to redesign the champion spell, that would also be welcomed. And our final champion is Lulu, who again is another one of these champions that I'm sure we can all agree needs something, definitely needs something. Lulu got a buff pretty recently, going from a 2-3 to a 3-3. Which I thought was a nice change. You know, it definitely is something at least, but it clearly was not enough, as we are still not seeing Lulu. And I think, unlike the other 2 champions we've seen today, this is one where we're not going to focus on Lulu, because I think we need to focus on the support archetype as a whole instead. And so these are the current support cards within Ionia, and I think it's always important to look within the region first for the cards that obviously Lulu is, you know, primarily meant to synergize with. And the problem is that a lot of these cards are not good. Ignore Shen, of course, because Shen's his own sort of deal, so we can ignore Shen. Flower Child, I think, is probably okay. He you know, it's fine for a 1-mana card. It kind of fits what the whole archetype wants to do. It makes some sense. Pix, though, Pix, unfortunately, I think does not make sense. Pix needs one of 2 things. Either this needs to be a 0-mana card, which would make sense for the support archetype and would help a lot with the support archetype, because then you could play Pix into a 1-drop, which would give you a very strong turn 1 play, you know, a very aggressive play, and give you both something to support and, you know, a supporter. So that makes a lot of sense to me, that if Pix, you know, became a 0-mana card, maybe you want to bump Pix down to a 0-1 if you did make it a 0-mana card, because, you know, that would be, I'm sure, you know, like Fleet Feather Tracker into Pix would be quite aggravating for a lot of people, you know, as they get smacked by it, or even a really aggressive like Legion Rearguard and Pix, you know, you get hit for 5 on turn 1, you know, that's never a great feeling. And then they've still got 2 units that are sticking about. But I think that would be okay. You know, you can see it with Doomkeeper into Butcher as well. So it's a play that can happen in the game already. And so I think that would be perfectly fine if it did happen. So I've got no real issue with that. So Pix being a 0-mana card, I'd be for. If not, then, you know, at least give it 1 attack. I'm not sure if that's like against sort of, you know, the design of Pix in some way. I'm not sure if there's some sort of, you know, law that I don't know about that means that Pix having 0 attack makes sense. If so, then, you know, just make Pix 0-mana. It's pretty simple, I think, either way. But Pix definitely needs a buff. Herald of Spring, you know, it isn't a Lulu card necessarily. It's, you know, more of just the generic Ionian card that gave, you know, each region at the start like a support card. And this was Ionia's. So I'm not sure necessarily if we need to do anything with this, because the lifesteal thing doesn't really necessarily fit Lulu either. You know, I think Lulu wants to be like sort of aggressive, like slower aggro to aggressive mid-range, if you know what I mean, like kind of in that sort of genre, kind of similar to how I would describe most Lucian decks are, pretty aggressive, but maybe can play slower if you need them to. That's where I'd put Lulu, so I'm not sure Herald of Spring really fits within this. Young Witch, I think, is fine. Obviously fits the more sort of slower version of Lulu decks, but I think is a perfectly fine card. Works well with Lulu to give her quick deck to make sure that she survives. Also works because she's an elusive, and getting the 4/4 from Lulu can also be a pretty big nasty hit as well. But then we come on to our final two, and these, again, I think are focus cards that we could really look at changing. So let's start with Fuzzy Caretaker, which I think personally needs to be the power card of this archetype. I would be looking at pushing this card really, really far, and that is because this is a card that outside of support can't make that much sense. It's a good support target and it has support itself, so therefore this is the kind of card that you want to be, pushed. This is the card that you want to help this archetype really go overboard, Support will be as good as this card wants to be, basically, I think. And so I would make this a monster card that on its own looks like, wait, why have they printed that? The Doomkeepers of the world. I want this card to be within that tier of card, where you look at it and go, well, that's better than everything else in the game. Because unlike a Doomkeeper, it only fits within like one deck really well. It might fit within others, but this is the card that we need to see just go crazy with. Make this a 3/4, and I'm being serious. Like, make this a 3/4, or make it a higher cost, but give even more stats on things, and give it a bunch of stats as well. I mean, really, I would push this card way out into the distance and say, this card is going to make support work and make Lulu work, and just watch it fly, watch it soar, watch it go crazy, because I would want this card to be nuts. And whether you give it 2 health, or whether you make it give even more stats than it already does, or you make it give quick attack as well as the 3 attack, I would want this card to be insane. And it definitely needs at least 1 more health. But as I say, maybe you don't want it to coalesce with Lulu. And if you didn't give this 1 more health, make it a 2-drop. And again, I'm being absolutely serious. I want this card to be really good. Like, I want this card to be the good card in support, so that it kind of keeps the whole archetype going and allows you to play support in a fun way. And yeah, I think that is how you would really fix support, is by going all in on a card like Fuzzy Caretaker. And lastly, we come to Trevor Snoozebomb, which has never really seen play, like, aside from meme decks. And I think the reason why that is because obviously as a 0/3, Trevor Snoozebomb has a big problem, and that is that he's going to attack once and then die, and that is not what you need from a card like this, where you want something probably to attack multiple times to get its value. And so what I would do to Trevor Snoozebomb, quite simply, is just give him like 5 health, 6 health even. Just go make sure that Trevor Snoozebomb can attack twice in a round. And, then we'll have a fun card to play with. I don't think I've ever seen anyone play this card. So by buffing this card quite significantly, by giving it like 2 or 3 health, you would have a new card, essentially. This would be a completely new card if we got it. And it would enable some, quite fun decks where, you could go all in on some, creating some big, I don't know, Renekton or Fizz, or, something that people might struggle to deal with in some way. And, you get an extra one with Mumble Sprite, and you just get this hideous monster coming at you from Trevor Snoozebomb. That would be fun, I think. And so I would like to see that in an ideal world. And so this is how I would kind of change this whole support archetype. I think looking at Lulu, what you might end up with if you look too much at Lulu is a very strong champion that, goes into like Demacia, maybe replaces Jarvan with Shen, right? That's what you'd get if you just keep buffing Lulu. So I don't think that is the right way to go, because if for instance you made Lulu a 3/4, yeah, she'd be in a Lulu Shen deck would exist, but it wouldn't necessarily be a support deck as such. It would just be sort of the replacement for Fiora Shen, Jarvan Shen. It would just become the replacement for that, right? And that's not really what I want. What I want is a support deck. I want a Lulu support deck to thrive, and that is why I think we need to look at the followers instead. And so there we go, 3 more champions down the drain. I think that those fixes would be pretty good for them. I know that some of them are quite major and therefore probably will never happen, particularly the Heimerdinger one, but I do think that that would fix those champions, and they'd be a lot more fun to play. And imagine a balance patch where all these things did happen. Right? You can disagree with the changes. That's absolutely fine. But if these balance patches did happen, you'd be pretty hyped to play the game again, wouldn't you? I'd be absolutely over the moon if they made changes this big, as I'm sure most people would be, because it would just absolutely tear up everything we know about Runeterra. It'd be like playing the game at the very early days again, when no one knew what was really good or bad, and it was a lot of fun. But unfortunately, I doubt they will do that, because they tend to be quite passive in terms of their buffs and nerfs and whatever, which is fine. That's actually a good thing for the most part. But I do think, some of these champions in particular could use with a big buff. But tomorrow we'll have 3 more champions for you, as we start to go into sort of the even lower depths of the sub 49% win rate zone, which will be fun to look at. So thank you so much for watching, and have a really nice day.